Hello, BookTube. As many of you will know, this weekend is Garb August 1.5. This is our wasted weekend. This is Ollie at CriminOlly reminding us that we are midway, we are on our way, months away from Garb August, his signature event where we all read trash for the month of August. Didn't want the field to lie fallow for too long, so he's giving us a wasted weekend where you are supposed to read as trashy as stuff as you can find for the weekend and report back. I've been thinking about that a lot. I maintain a significant amount of trash in my diet anyway. Unfortunately, the element of trash that I maintain in my diet is usually the wrong kind of trash. Believe it or not, there is a wrong kind of trash, and you know because you've read it. And that's trash where the author thinks they're writing a good book, and they're just not. And you're stuck wading your way through trash. The kind of trash that we celebrate on Garb August is trash that knows it's trash, and that wants you to just have fun. And that, I try to incorporate as much of that as well, although I am guilty in the last few months of stockpiling titles like that for Garb August. So when I knew that the wasted weekend was coming up, I was wondering, well, what should I do? Should I uncork one of those books and read it or whatnot? And then I saw a video on Troy Tradup's channel. I'll leave a link to it down below. It's amazing to me that he has 150 subscribers instead of 1,500 subscribers. That is amazing to me because his channel's great. And he observed Wasted Weekend in a particular way. He went to his Kindle and looked at samples that he had, which is, I'm sure you all know, it's a brief section of a book that you get, that you can download to sort of figure out what it is, a taste of it. Amazon and other electronic book vendors incorporated the idea of samples, very much encouraged by publishers, to sort of simulate the experience of sampling a book in a bookstore. They reasoned 10 years ago that the only way that electronic books would work would be if they simulated every aspect of the experience of bookstores and improved on them. So your sample should be nice and hefty. Your checkout should have no line, no small talk, nothing like that. No pressure to, would you care to join our membership club or anything like that. It should all be easier to do. And it largely is. Troy decided to go through a handful of samples, read them, and just report back on them, on just the samples. I love that approach, and I love samples myself. I've talked about them many times on this channel. I view them as auditions for the author. A book's sample has to do, in my opinion, two things right in order to be successful. Number one is that it has to give you enough of the book. Way too many book samples, especially from mainstream publishers, who have bean counters somewhere on some C-list suite office saying, don't give out a single word of the actual text of the book. So we'll have a sample of the book, and we'll call it a sample, and it's the cover, and it's the publication information, and it may be the dedication, and maybe the table of contents, but nothing more than that. Stop the sample before a single word of the book. That's a very bad idea, and unfortunately some self-published authors have imitated that. I'm not going to give away my work. I'm not going to give you a sample of my work. As if their dust jacket in a traditionally published book in a bookstore would be blank. It's self-defeating, as are so many habits in the self-publishing world. It is self-defeating. A perfect example of which would be this video. Because I saw Troy's video and I thought, why don't I go through Amazon and download a bunch of samples, read them all, and then come back and talk to you about them on, I admit, a kind of sotto voce search for garbage. I was hoping that my samples read through would have as many samples of garbage in it as Troy's did, at least. And you will see from the books that we're going to talk about how many I talk about, and the original list of books that I was going to talk about, of samples that I downloaded, was a third again as long. A third of the titles that I downloaded were not useful samples at all. They weren't actually samples of the book. And most of them are self-published. You are shooting yourself in the foot if you do that. You are. Not only for, a video, an oddity like a video like this, but because if you don't tell the reader anything about your book, you can't expect them to buy it. And that is what you want them to do. I struggle to add. So I want to show you the books that remain, the books that survived that one essential test of, is there any text here at all for me to assess? And the second task that a sample should do, ideally, is make you want to read more of the book. Simple as that. And that's a yardstick that I have used on my own long before I had a BookTube channel. And that is, if I download a sample of a book, any book, and I read it, and I'm reading along, and I get to that part you're all familiar with, where it says, here's the end of your sample. If I get to the end of that part and I really, really want to read the next chapter or the next section of the book, that author has earned my money. And I will pay. I will pay for the whole book. That author has earned my money. That's all that an author has to do to earn money. And oftentimes, that policy of mine has led me to authors that I now follow. I now read them regularly, and they've given me a great deal of enjoyment. And they are self-published authors. I am a fan. I don't know that because I'm a fan, because I was hooked by wanting to read more instead of critically assessing the work, which you can't do with a sample. You can't critically assess the whole book if you just have a sample. Since I came to them that way as a fan, I don't know that I'd feel comfortable reviewing any of them. But I don't think there are any examples this time around. So let's start off. We'll start off with Arcane Knight, which is the second book in the Order and Chaos saga, which is an epic lit RPG fantasy novel. Lit RPG, I assume, meaning this is a role-playing game written as a novel. This is by Timothy McGowan with an absolutely fantastic cover. Whatever he paid for that cover, it was worth it, and then 10 times over. This is number 2 in a series, and I've said many times on this channel that puts a burden on the author. That does not put a burden on me. Too many people think that. If you waltz into book number 2 or even book number 3, after book number 3, maybe the burden is on you. But if you waltz into book number 1, number 2, or number 3 in a series, and you feel completely at sea, that's the author's fault, not your fault. The author should be making you at home. The author should not think everyone's going to read book 1 and then move on faithfully. And this is about a main character who is something called an awakened adventurer, which I, at first, since I'm online all day long, I immediately assumed that meant that the awakened adventurer would have pronouns in his bio and a Ukrainian flag. But it turns out to mean something completely different. And in the sample that I got, I was never clear on what it did mean. The sample that I got starts off with the main character captured and being tortured, and there's almost nothing to help me. Now, the full brunt of what I might need to get me through this book might have occurred right after the sample, but that's not where it should be. It should be in the sample. The writing was very good, and you're going to find that is a distressingly common attitude among these things. I did not do well for Garb August for my wasted weekend. Only a couple of things. But the next one we have is The Darker the Night by Martin Patience, which I did not get any sense that this was part of a series. I think this is a debut. And it's ripped from the headlines. It's set in the context of a legislative move for Scottish independence. And a senior civil servant is found, it's kind of funny, the senior civil servant is found dead, brutally murdered in a rain-soaked alley in Glasgow. And when I first read that, I thought, yeah. So that means Friday night in Glasgow. Why would that be? Why would that kick off the action of a novel? But it does. And the segment that I got here, it's competently done, and as you can see, it's beautifully done. That was another thing here, is that I remember what self-published books used to look like, and used to read like. This reads professionally enough, and it looks wonderful. It didn't do anything for me. The sample that I got didn't do anything for me, but it definitely doesn't count as Garb August because it wasn't at all garbage. Then this next one, I intentionally went afield. This is not my usual bailiwick. I don't tend to read horror, and when I do, I don't tend to like it. Not because it's necessarily bad, but because it looks like it's going straight to an audience that I am not part of, that I just am not part of it at all. And I don't necessarily view that as the fault of the book. If an author knows exactly what they want to do, and it just happens not to include me, that's okay. I can still assess how they're doing it. The assessment of, this is the book, Gothic, by Philip Fracassi. And it's got a great, those creases are actually part of the cover design, so it's a really neat cover design, I think, probably meant to evoke old-style mass-market paperbacks. I don't want to block the Bean's lovely face there. She's finally able to go back up on her windowsill after, because it's not 2 degrees Fahrenheit. She would go up there and start shivering. I'd have to herd her back down again. I admit my expectations were a little bit rocky with this one, because it's about a washed up, horror writer, nearly 60, long time since he captured the magic, kind of wants to rekindle his career, and he gets an antique desk. He's given an antique desk as a way to sort of ignite his writing ability. And the antique desk has a lot of baggage. That is the hook that sort of grabs the whole of the story. In fact, the sample that I read puts more focus on the hunt for the thing connected with that desk than it does on the writer. But even so, the mention of a washed-up horror writer who's trying to rekindle his creative juices, if that's not going to make you think, I mean, it's automatically going to make you think of The Shining. You mean The Shining? You want to be sued? It's going to make you think of The Shining. It's a fairly hackneyed premise. And it did make me think of that, and then I read the sample, and the sample is very Stephen King-esque, with a lot of Dean Koontz in it as well, and that... I recognize that Stephen King is a sentimental favorite for millions and millions of readers. I recognize that Dean Koontz can actually be very good sometimes in his novels. I would argue, I would make those millions of fans wail, but I would argue that Stephen King never is. But Dean Koontz can be, and so writing your book that way with that kind of a premise, I'm not saying that any of it is a misstep on the part of the author. It isn't trash. It didn't do anything for me at all. Then we have a book. This is a Western. It's a Western. It's by Misty Malone. It looks good. I really wish that someone in the author's circle had given it a different title. That's kind of a silly thing, but nevertheless, it's called A Key to Her Chest. So I'm not the only one who's thinking what you're thinking right now. This is a Western novel starring a young woman named Naomi, whose grandfather is the town doctor, and he has just been, I don't care what society says, I'm going to teach you everything I know. So she is, by the time this book starts, she is effectively the town's other doctor. But then her grandfather's brother, comes into the story, and he's a jerk and controlling, and an element of dark chaos. And at the same time, introduced into the sample is an element of bright chaos, which is the sheriff in town. He of the flowing locks there, who starts to feel things for our female doctor. And the sample that I read was well done. It didn't reach right out and grab me, but there was nothing wrong with it at all. So it doesn't count for Carbogast. I could easily see myself reading this whole book. However, that's not the yardstick that I use for samples. I don't get to an end of the sample and say, well, I could easily see myself reading more of this, like, for instance, if it came in the mail. But I'm not jumping out of my skin. I'm not needing to read the next bit of it. And that is good news for the author, because that means this author will certainly reach a readership and deserves it. But it's not going to get me to read anymore. Unless this came in the mail, I would not read the rest of it. It was competently done. What have we got next? Oh, yes. Okay. Well, they can't all be home runs. This is by Mark Goodwin. It is also the beginning of a series. This is called Lamentations for the Fallen. Book 1 is Urchin, which is about Caleb Webb, a young man named Caleb Webb, who is out on his own. He's been kicked around by society. He's known his share of tragedy and loss. And this is a post-apocalyptic novel, a sort of a post-economic collapse, societal collapse novel. And his outcast sort of school of hard knocks position puts him in a perfect position when that catastrophe happens, when the you-know-what hits the fan. He's in a perfect position to look out for himself. And as a premise, that works just fine for me. Absolutely. But the warning on this novel is that if you're offended by conservative principles, this probably isn't the book for you. And I'm sorry, but I don't look away from that kind of posturing anymore. There's no way to do that anymore in a you think your way and I'll think my way and we'll just go our separate ways way. There's no way to do that anymore since a violent armed insurrection to overthrow my government. Since that moment, there's no way for you to make a sanctimonious pre-publication bit of blather about how if you're offended by conservative principles, you'd probably go elsewhere. You should probably go elsewhere. Once upon a time, you could have done that. Once upon a time, there was a safe haven for you to do that. Not anymore. Not anymore. And it's time that you realize that, as opposed to just hauling out bromides like that and thinking that it's okay. Conservative principles now mean bigotry and a violent attempt to overthrow the government of the country and install a dictator. That's what you mean when you say conservative principles. And I get hot under the collar on the subject, and I thought, okay, well, it's an extreme long shot, but it is a good premise, so you should give this sample a try. So I gave this sample a try. And before we get to the book, the author vents a little about the Federal Reserve and secret cartels jacking up prices and making money worthless and creating horrible runaway inflation. He doesn't, I'll give him credit, in that opening throat clearing, mention the Jews. Nevertheless, they're not far away, I don't think, in his imagination. And I thought, okay, well, just critically speaking, just speaking as a critic, this is a terrible way to open a novel. Okay, you don't open a novel by lecturing your readers about the reality of the news that they're reading. Especially since that news is voluble. It can change from news cycle to news cycle. For instance, this book obviously was written, formatted, and published before the latest U.S. jobs report, which just came out a couple of days ago and does not portray the end of the world. It does not portray the you-know-what hitting the fan. But critically, I thought, that's not a good idea. Even Tolstoy saved that for the afterword of War and Peace. He didn't open with that, and you shouldn't either. You should bring us right into the action if you want us to care. But he goes on in that throat clearing, and it gets worse and worse. And by the time he got to saying the 2020 election was stolen right under our noses, I gave up. So I don't think I didn't ever actually get to the prose in this book, to the fiction in this book. The 2020 election was not stolen. And if you say that it is, you are saying that you are okay with a violent insurrection to overthrow the government of my country. You are saying it's okay for Steve Bannon to declare that the people who say the 2020 election wasn't stolen should be imprisoned and maybe executed without trial because they're displeasing the boss. You want a stupid orange dictator. I am going to go elsewhere. If that's the password that gets me into your book, you can keep it. Okay, so this is very much garbage, but it still doesn't qualify for Garbogus because it's the other kind of garbage that I was talking about. This author has no idea that he's writing QAnon effing nonsense. He has no idea that he's writing garbage. He thinks he's the last righteous man. So it didn't work. It failed me. But it didn't fail me for it didn't fail me for Garbogus, unfortunately. So we'll move on. We'll move on to another Western. This is by Janice Cole Hopkins, and it is called The Matchmaker. It's a matchmaker for the Marshal. This is part of the Matchmaker series. This is well into the series, but I got the impression that the author was trying to make it a standalone. Maybe trying to make all the volumes a standalone. Certainly the romance premise here is pretty by the numbers. You've encountered it many, many times if you read Western romance novels. There's a marshal in town. His actual name is Marshal Walker, which is a little bit easy. It's a little bit on the nose. And he's not getting any younger, and he decides that his nieces need a mother figure in their life. He decides to marry. Decides to take advantage of a matchmaking session and get himself a wife. And what I read was clean and professionally done, professionally written. It didn't grip me. It didn't grab me at all. I would not read the rest of it. I would not continue unless it came to me in the mail, and even then, it would probably be dutiful. It would probably be a palate cleanser between two other books. But still, I want to stress, it doesn't count for Garbogus. It's yards and yards better than self-published stuff along exactly those lines would have been 10 years ago. Then we come to fantasy novel, and this is part of a series. So I knew that I was jumping in. This is book 3 in a series. The series is called Rebel Demons. And this is called My Demon of Earth. It's by Rosary A. Johns. And this is it's it's about the main character. It's always kind of weird when you see a romance novel, especially a self-published novel, where you recognize the cover model. That's always a little weird because the cover model here is not the main character here. The character this is supposed to represent is a shape-shifting. He's a shape-shifting demon type figure, and he shifts into not just a panther, but a winged panther, a panther with wings. And I assure you that the cover model here, although capable of quite a few feats of dexterity, once the wine has been flowing, cannot do that. So it's a little bit of dissonance anyway, but you got to go somewhere for your cover model. And this one didn't work at all for me. I know that I'm asking for trouble if I read book 3 in a series. I very much felt that I was reading book 3 in a series. I don't want to block the bean. I'm trying hard not to block her adorable face. There we go. I very much felt that I was reading book 3 in a series. And maybe at book 3 of any series, you're starting to feel that way. No attempt was made whatsoever to catch me up. A paragraph. I would have been grateful for a paragraph. There wasn't even that. And also, there was a lot of self-publishy fantasy prose, lots and lots of forced obscenity, lots and lots of slang and idiom, lots and lots of prose. I'm sure the author thinks that they're writing very, very catchy, very contemporary prose, but it's on autopilot. And I don't know that I guess self-published authors have a tendency not to realize that autopilot prose is bad. It's bad. Anyone can do it. And we don't read stories by storytellers in order to read something that anyone can do. Stories by storytellers are specifically set out by the fact that they don't use autopilot prose. And it doesn't matter how slangy it is. It doesn't matter how choked with F-bombs it is. If it's autopilot prose, it's still going to be a little boring. So it's extremely well designed on many different levels, and I'm sure that it, on one level, for its fans, is probably interesting. I'm trying hard not to use here the standard critic condescending bromide of, for those who like this sort of thing, they will like this sort of thing. I'm trying hard not to do that, but it definitely didn't work for me. Definitely not. Then we move on to Australian fiction. We have Australian fiction. This is by Renee Black, and it's called On the Down Low. And it stars a girl named Haley, I think her name is. She is a pilot. Oh, no, I'm confusing this with another piece of Australian fiction that's on this list. This was a sample about a city girl named Haley who goes to the Australian outback. And there's an extremely hunky guy named Ryan there who she sort of... no, I think this is the one where Haley is a pilot. She's a very independent spirit, one way or another. And she's had a relationship with Ryan before and is wondering if he even remembers it. And that is standard romance stuff. I thought this was much better than standard romance stuff. Of course, On the Down Low has, I think this author is Australian, not just writing about Australia, but in Australia. Maybe it has a different meaning down under. On the Down Low has a very specific meaning in American parlance, and nothing like that happens in this novel. I was kind of hoping, because Ryan has a best friend, a male best friend. I was kind of wondering, but at least in the sample that I read, nothing like that happened. But the sample that I read was quite professional. I don't know if Renee Black has a mainstream U.S. contract with Harper or Macmillan, and I don't know if she'd want such a thing. Maybe she wouldn't. Plenty of self-published authors don't. It's long since time, any of you out there that are harboring this prejudice, it's long since time that we all stopped thinking of self-published authors as people who couldn't hack it in the mainstream world. Plenty of people do it who could. This book could easily be picked up by a mainstream publisher. It's that good. Purely, very energetically written, and Haley herself is a fantastic character. Ryan maybe not so much, but do we want him to be anything more than a set of abs? I didn't. But we need to get rid of that stereotype. Self-published authors might like the freedom. They might like the more direct contact with their readers. There are all sorts of reasons. They might like the better exchange on money. There are all sorts of reasons why you would opt to do this. It does not mean that you tried and failed in the mainstream market. Let's get rid of that completely. But anyway, I thought this was a success. I'm sorry, I'm failing on Wasted Weekend. I'm failing on Garbragas 1.5. I thought this was a success. I wanted to read more, and I will probably do that. I think Renee Black is a prolific self-published author. Probably she has earned another fan. Then we have something by Vaughn Hepner. This is a novel called The Sword of Abram. a decidedly odd thing. This is a historical novel set in biblical times, so it's mostly fantasy, but informed by as much historical fact as the author can bring to bear. It's about a character named Damon the Athenian, and it is meant to flesh out events that are alluded to in the book of Genesis, chapter 14. And that's all. So you have a reigning king in Sodom. You have a whole bunch of other characters that are mentioned, sometimes in only one line of Genesis 14. Given such a narrow origin story, I assumed going into this thing that it would not be good, that it was for basically Bible fiction for Bible fanatics, but I thought it was really good. I didn't sense that at all. I thought it was terrific. I would definitely read the rest of this book, and probably will. This little excursion into sample land that Troy Tradup sent me on probably is going to mean buying some books this weekend. One of these things, I don't think we've hit it yet, but one of them I bought it immediately. But these others probably I will. This next one is by Richard Tongue, and it is the first book in Tournament of Shadows. It's called To Hell with Honor. This is a science fiction series with a very good premise where the Terran Commonwealth has expanded into the whole of the solar system. They have many colonies, lots and lots of advanced technology, and they have setbacks. And gradually, and then abruptly, they decide to withdraw to Earth. And all of those outlying civilizations and colonies and people can be on their own. They can, sink or swim on their own. I detected here, I don't know if it's on the author's mind, I know nothing about the author, but the setup here, the premise here is exactly the same as the Roman withdrawal from Britain, only in a science fiction setting. And I thought it was terrific. Absolutely terrific. Now, the author, I don't know anything about the author, but I sense that he is a geek after my own heart. One of the vessels that is in one of the sample chapters that I read, almost all of these books had very generous samples. The ones, it was an either or thing. The ones that I picked and then realized there isn't any text here, they had none. They had no text at all. And then the ones that remained had plenty of text. So, I have no complaints there. But one of the vessels that we're introduced to in these early chapters is a Kolchak class vessel. And in that moment, for that naming, I felt like the author was right in the room with me. And I felt, okay, you and I are going to get along. One of the vessel's class names is Kolchak. And some of you out there are nodding right now because Kolchak is well known to you as a character and you love him because you can't not love him. I thought this was really good. I was not swayed by merely the mention of a Kolchak class vessel any more than I was swayed in Christopher Paolini's new book by the mention of the planet's name as Taluk 7. I wasn't swayed by that. I just smiled at it. But I thought it was really good. It's really good Expanse-style science fiction. I really enjoyed it. So I'm in on book one. I will buy book one, and I will stay for the rest of the series. Let's keep going here. Okay, this next one is by Michael Meehan. It was the biggest surprise, I think, of all the ones here. This is An Ungrateful Instrument. It's a historical novel. I didn't find much in the way of historical fiction that wasn't historical romance. But this is about... This is about two musicians in the court of King Louis XIV. I believe their instrument is the viola da gamba, which is not something that you see on the subway every day. And the story is told, the story of their musical adventures at court, is told by the sister of one of the main characters who is deaf. At least she's deaf and she doesn't speak. So she has. I thought that I read that about this book before I dived in, and I thought, you as an author have set yourself an almost unbeatable narrative obstacle. How interesting that you would set that for yourself before you start, and it works. Boy, oh boy, this was terrific. Textured, moving, and very, lots and lots of forward momentum. Again, I want to stress, any mainstream publishing outlet that came across this manuscript would be crazy not to publish it. They would. I am sure that this is the product of either the author deciding that rigmarole is not for me. I'd rather just be my own boss and make my own editorial decisions rather than have somebody in corporate say this, and this needs to change and me not having any right because I've signed a contract. Either the author did that or the author did submit this around and just never got a response, which is easily likely. It is so important to know somebody in mainstream publishing. Otherwise, you are one manuscript in 1,000. I've known people, I've known publicists who have said that when they encounter a manuscript that is just there, or that's maybe agented but not by anybody that they know, or they take a manuscript literally from the slush pile in order to have something to read while they eat their Cobb salad at lunch, or go home for the night. Some of them, bless their souls, actually do bring home manuscripts at night to just read through. And they will, by pure happenstance, find a manuscript like this and think, oh my God, this is really good. I've never heard of the author. I don't know the agent, but we need to do this. We need to get this book. That will be pure chance if it happens. It could be that the author encountered that and just didn't want to bother with it. Maybe he got discouraged, but boy, oh boy, was this good. It's historical fiction. The sample that I read easily made me want to read the rest of the book. Same thing with this next one. I know, I'm striking out for August. I'm not having anywhere near the luck with garbage that Troy had. But this is a book, this is a historical novel. It's called The Vitruvian Man by David Oxsmith. And the runner-up at the top says, the man behind Da Vinci's famous drawing. And there is the famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man that you've seen, I'm sure, in your art book and whatnot. And when I first saw that superscript up there, I thought, oh, okay, so this is a historical novel about Leonardo da Vinci and his surly houseboy, a man named Salai, who was the model for this drawing, and who's been the subject of a few historical novels. But no, no, I was wrong. I started reading it, and I was wrong. This is instead the story. The man behind the famous Da Vinci drawing is not the model for the drawing. It's the man we get the name from. It's Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, the Roman, the ancient Roman, who was an engineer, an engineering manual. From the limited bits of information that we can glean from the historical record, he probably led a very eventful life and knew a couple of Roman emperors. And this author decides to tell his story. And it's ancient Roman historical fiction, which I would think should be a little bit more prominent on the cover. But maybe since this is digital, I don't know if this even exists as a paperback. Maybe the author's just counting on the fact that you will explore a little. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. And right now, I mean, look at the cover design. If you saw this, would you think ancient Rome? No, you would not. You would think at the most this is a novel about Leonardo da Vinci. But maybe you might think it's a Dan Brown type thing. It's yards and yards away from either one of those things. And it's a really good example of what it is. It's really good Roman historical fiction. The sample that I read was terrific. I easily want to read more. So I am hooked once again. But I guess what I'm telling you is if you see this, don't be fooled. This is Roman historical fiction. And I don't think there's anything on the cover that would tell you that. I think most people would not think, oh, of course, Vitruvius Pollio. I don't think they would think that. I think they would think Leonardo da Vinci and maybe Salai if they know his name. So I loved it, though. Absolutely loved it. Oh my God, that's it. We're actually done. We got to the end. Oh, that's right. The iPad automatically alphabetizes things. So we got to the end because it's Vitruvian Man. But as you could see, that wasn't a good track record for a wasted weekend. Unfortunately, I am probably disappointing Ollie because I didn't find much garbage. And the one piece of absolute garbage that I found is the wrong kind of garbage. It's the kind of garbage that isn't in on the joke. It has no idea. If Lamentations for the Fallen were a parody of arch conservative Trumpist conspiracy theory ravings, if it were a parody of that, then it might be the right kind of trash. Then probably I would have enjoyed at least a little of that, but it's not. It's the ravings of a Trump cult member. So it's trash, but it's not knowing trash. And it's the kind of trash where during Garb August last summer, plenty of people who took part in Garb August, and I think a lot more people are going to take part this year. I'm hoping that I still cut the mustard to make it as a host. I would love to host for Garb August. But plenty of people last year went out and just, gathered as much garbage as they could and came across plenty of examples like that. I remember it came from the page, and I watched a video of his where he said, all right, this is garbage, but this is not the fun kind of garbage at all. And plenty of other people did too. I admit, it's tricky. It's tricky. There are two kinds of garbage out there, and who knew? But aside from that, I'm afraid I'm letting Ollie down, and I'm also letting Troy down. Because a lot of the stuff that he read, his summaries of his own samples are hilarious. But a lot of the stuff that he read was bad. It genuinely qualified as garbage. And a lot of the stuff here, I mean, you heard from this video, a lot of the stuff the samples that I read this time around, I'm going to buy the whole book. I want to read the rest of the story. That happened all over this. How many? How many did this happen with? Vitruvian Man, definitely. I want to know his story. I mean, the sample leads us off almost on a cliffhanger. An Ungrateful Instrument? Absolutely, yes, to read the book. To Hell with Honor? Absolutely. I love the setting that this author has come up with. I want more. Sword of Abram? Maybe not. I thought it was the sample was really, really interesting. I'm not sure that I would want to stick around. On the Down Low? Absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe, who knows, in the third act, maybe Ryan will get together with his friend. My Demon of Earth? No. No, I'm happy about the cover, and I'm happy about the fans, but I would have to start with book one. Maybe I would do that. Maybe I would download a sample of book one. A Match for the Marshal? Probably not. Lamentations for the Fallen? Definitely not. No, and I would also argue that the author is a bad American. Plain and simple. That normal, shibboleth that you just haul out, conservative principles, doesn't work anymore. Might have worked once upon a time, doesn't work anymore. Not after a violent insurrection that you clearly agree with. No. After that, it's us and them. It's not conservative or Democrat or anything like that. It's, are you in favor of democracy or are you not? Or you want me to be a slave? So, definitely a no. Then the Key to Her Chest, not only would I change the title, why couldn't it have been Key to Her Heart? Why did you have to do that? but probably not. I'm interested enough in Naomi, but it seems to me that the novel is going to go in way too much for romance gimmicks and the standard romance line. And if that's the case, no. Then Gothic, probably not. Not necessarily. In fact, not at all, because it had a lack of quality. I am clearly not the audience for the book. Through my own fault. Despite a lifetime of reading horror and Gothic fiction, I've never liked it. The key has never turned for me. And then The Dark of the Night, probably not, just because it seemed a little too by the numbers to me. Arcane Knight, probably not, very energetically done, but I would need to read book one. At least I would need to read book one. Although, how about that cover? Huh? Good Lord. And that's it. So that's about half. It was a tour through Amazon samples, but I don't know that it qualifies as Garbaugust. I don't know that it does. So anyway, this video has gone on long enough. This was a lot of fun. I want to thank Ollie for a wasted weekend. Of course, you've got to watch his send-off video. It's just amazing. And I want to thank Troy Tradup and direct as many of you there as possible. He should at least have 200 subscribers before the weekend is over, but he should have 1,000. But he inspired me to go looking for Amazon samples. So there you go. You never know where Steve is going to strike. But I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.